In 1955, there were towns in Oklahoma and New Mexico that existed almost entirely because of one road. A diner sat on the corner, a coffee cup never stayed empty for more than a minute, and a plate of chicken fried steak cost 35 cents. Then the interstate came through 20 miles away, and almost overnight, that whole town and that diner stopped existing to most of America. It's the summer of 1957, somewhere along a stretch of two-lane blacktop cutting through the Texas Panhandle, and a station wagon pulls off in front of a diner with a hand-painted sign and a gravel lot already half full of cars, with license plates from 6 different states. Inside, the counter stools are worn smooth from years of use. A waitress refills coffee cups without being asked, and a plate of chicken fried steak, smothered in white pepper gravy, lands in front of a trucker who's been driving since before sunrise. Nobody in that diner knows it yet, but within a decade, a new interstate highway will be built 20 miles north, and this exact town, this exact diner, will quietly stop existing to almost everyone driving through America. Route 66 wasn't just a road, it was an economic lifeline for hundreds of small towns stretched between Chicago and Los Angeles, and the diners that lined it weren't just restaurants, they were often the single largest employer on a town's main street. Number 17 on this list is a breakfast most Americans ate weekly and can no longer find, made the original way. Number 6 is a sandwich that quietly disappeared from menus the moment fast food chains learned to copy it cheaper. And number 1 is the dish so tied to this highway that old-timers still argue about which diner made it best. These weren't fine dining meals. They were built for truckers on tight schedules, traveling families stretching a road trip budget, and small-town cooks who fed the exact same regulars every single day of the week. They mattered because an entire highway culture, breakdowns, detours, long hauls, family vacations, ran on the food served at these counters, and they disappeared for a reason that has almost nothing to do with taste, and everything to do with a federal highway system that quietly rerouted traffic around the towns that used to depend on it. Here's what got left behind. Number 20 is hash browns, shredded potato pressed flat on a griddle and left alone just long enough for the underside to turn deep golden and crisp while the inside stayed soft, then flipped once, never more. This was the side dish that came with almost every breakfast plate on the highway, and the way a diner cooked its hash browns often told a trucker everything he needed to know about whether a place was worth stopping at twice. It required patience most fast food kitchens later refused to spend, and as breakfast service moved towards speed over technique, the properly griddled version became harder and harder to find. Number 19 is the grilled cheese sandwich. 2 slices of white bread and a thick slab of cheese pressed on a flat top until both sides turned deep golden, usually served alongside a bowl of tomato soup for dipping. It was the cheapest thing on the menu, and diners along the highway knew that a family traveling on a tight budget could still afford to feed a hungry kid without embarrassment. It never fully disappeared from American life, but the specific version, made on a diner's seasoned flat top rather than in a microwave, quietly became rarer as roadside diners themselves closed one by one. Number 18 is onion rings. Thick-cut onion slices dipped in a beer-thinned batter and fried until the coating turned deep amber and audibly crisp, served piled high in a red plastic basket lined with wax paper. This was the shared plate, ordered by families splitting one order 4 ways in the middle of a long drive, or by truckers looking for something to eat with their hands while they read the newspaper. Hand-cut, hand-battered onion rings took real time per order, and as speed became the priority for roadside food service, they were gradually replaced almost everywhere by pre-formed, frozen versions that never quite matched the texture. Number 17 is the root beer float, a scoop of vanilla ice cream dropped into a tall glass of root beer until the foam rose right up to the rim, usually served with a long spoon and a straw side by side. This wasn't dinner, it was the reward, ordered by kids in the back seat who'd survived hours on the road without complaining, and by adults who wanted a taste of something that felt like a genuine treat rather than just fuel. It was cheap, it required almost no skill to make, and it became one of the most photographed, most remembered small joys of an entire generation's road trips. Here's what mattered underneath all of this. A diner on Route 66 wasn't competing with other restaurants for your business the way a restaurant does today. It was often the only option for 50 miles in either direction, which meant it had to serve everyone, the trucker on a schedule, the family on vacation, the local regular who ate there every single day. That kind of universal reliance is almost impossible to find anywhere in American food culture today, where every business tries to specialize and target a narrow customer. These diners couldn't specialize. They had to be good at everything, because there was nowhere else to go. Number 16 is the pancake breakfast. 3 or 4 griddled cakes stacked high, browned at the edges, served with real butter melting into the top layer, and warmed syrup poured from a small metal pitcher rather than a plastic bottle. This was the meal that got a family back on the road for another 6 hours of driving, and diners along the highway built entire morning rushes around serving it fast, hot, and consistently. As interstate rest stops and fast food breakfast chains took over that same morning traffic in later decades, the sit-down, made-to-order version lost the captive audience it had depended on for years. Number 15 is liver and onions. Thinly sliced beef liver dredged in flour and pan-fried, topped with a generous pile of caramelized onions and served alongside mashed potatoes. This dish belonged to an older generation raised during the Depression, when organ meats were affordable, nutritious, and never allowed to go to waste. Diners kept it on the menu for decades because regulars, especially older customers, ordered it specifically and would notice immediately if it disappeared. As younger generations of travelers grew up without that same relationship to organ meat, demand slowly dried up, and it quietly vanished from most menus without anyone officially deciding to remove it. Number 14 is the club sandwich. Triple-stacked turkey, bacon, lettuce, and tomato between 3 slices of toast, held together with toothpicks and cut into neat triangles. This was the order for a traveler who wanted to feel like they were treating themselves without spending much, a small indulgence built into an otherwise practical road trip. It required more prep steps than most sandwiches on the menu, and as diners cut staff and simplified their offerings to survive declining highway traffic, multi-step sandwiches like this one were often among the first items trimmed. Number 13 is biscuits and gravy. Split buttermilk biscuits smothered in a thick, peppery white sausage gravy, served hot enough that the top layer had usually just started to soften into the biscuit underneath. This dish carried real southern and rural roots, brought onto the highway by cooks who'd grown up making it at home long before they ever worked a diner counter. It was filling enough to carry a trucker through a full shift of driving, and it cost the kitchen very little to produce in bulk. It's a breakfast most Americans still order today, but the from-scratch, small-batch version made fresh each morning became much harder to find as diners closed and chain restaurants standardized the recipe. Here's the truth about what happened next. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 didn't just build new roads, it fundamentally rerouted the entire flow of American travel, sending interstate traffic around small towns instead of directly through their main streets. A diner that had depended on every single car passing by its front window suddenly found itself 20, 30, sometimes 50 miles from the nearest exit ramp. Some towns fought to survive, many simply couldn't. This wasn't a story about food falling out of fashion. It was a story about the road itself moving somewhere else and taking the customers with it. Number 12 is the chili, a thick beef and bean chili simmered for hours and ladled from a pot that had usually been going since early morning, served plain or spooned over a split hot dog depending on which state you were passing through. It was inexpensive, it held its quality for hours on a low flame, and regional variations became a genuine point of local pride, with truckers arguing for years about which stretch of highway made it best. As chain restaurants standardized chili into a single national recipe, the wide regional variety that once defined the highway version slowly disappeared. Number 11 is homemade beef stew. Chunks of stewing beef, carrots, and potatoes simmered for hours in a thick brown gravy until the meat fell apart under a fork. This was the meal ordered on cold mornings by travelers who wanted something that tasted like a home kitchen rather than a roadside stop, and it required real time that faster kitchens later couldn't spare. As convenience foods and pre-made bases entered commercial kitchens through the later part of the century, the slow-cooked, made-from-scratch version became too labor-intensive to justify at diner prices. Number 10 is coconut cream pie, a thick vanilla custard studded with shredded coconut, poured into a flaky crust, and topped with a cloud of whipped cream and toasted coconut flakes. This was the specialty pie, the one a diner would proudly point to in a rotating glass case near the register, often made fresh only once or twice a week because of how quickly the custard needed to be used. It became a genuine point of pride for cooks who took real ownership of their dessert case, and as diners closed or were bought out by chains with centralized, shipped-in desserts, that kind of individual craftsmanship quietly disappeared along with them. Number 9 is the country ham steak. A thick slice of salt-cured ham pan-fried until the edges crisped, often served with red-eye gravy made right in the same pan using coffee and the leftover ham drippings. This dish was regional, tied closely to the diners scattered through Oklahoma, Missouri, and the stretches of highway closer to the south, and it represented a real farming tradition being served to travelers who had no connection to that tradition at all. As curing and smoking practices shifted toward faster industrial methods, and as regional specialties gave way to standardized national menus, the specific flavor of true country-cured ham became harder to find outside the towns that still made it themselves. Number 8 is fried chicken, breaded and fried until the skin turned deep golden and audibly crisp. Serve 2 or 3 pieces to a plate alongside a biscuit or a scoop of mashed potatoes. This dish anchored entire Sunday dinner rushes at diners along the highway, drawing in local families as well as travelers who'd timed their drive around getting a hot meal on a weekend. It required real fry stations and constant oil management, expensive to maintain properly, and as smaller diners closed and larger chains took over that same customer base with centralized frying operations, the individually seasoned, small-batch version became increasingly rare. Number 7 is the hot roast beef sandwich, thin-sliced roast beef piled on white bread and completely covered in brown gravy, served with a scoop of mashed potatoes doing the exact same thing beside it. It was the meal ordered by truckers who wanted something that felt like a real dinner, even if they were eating it alone at a counter at 10 at night. It required slow-roasted beef held and sliced fresh throughout the day, and as that kind of in-house roasting gave way to pre-sliced deli meat in later decades, the dish lost the depth that had made it a signature order in the first place. Here's a deeper truth worth sitting with. These diners survived on repeat business from people who lived nearby just as much as they survived on travelers passing through, and when the highway moved, they lost both audiences at once. The trucker had no reason to exit anymore, and eventually, as the town itself shrank without that traffic, even the locals who'd eaten there their whole lives had fewer reasons to stay. It wasn't one single cause. It was a slow unraveling of an entire local economy that had been built, quietly and almost accidentally, around a 2-lane road. Number 6 is the patty melt, a ground beef patty topped with melted Swiss cheese and grilled onions, pressed between 2 slices of rye bread that had been buttered and griddled until both sides turned deep golden brown. This sandwich became a genuine signature item at diners specifically, distinct from anything a drive-in or fast food stand was serving at the time. It required a flat top, real butter, and real patience with the onions, and when fast food chains eventually introduced their own simplified, faster versions of a similar sandwich, the original diner patty melt lost the novelty that had once made it worth stopping for. Number 5 is meatloaf, a dense loaf of seasoned ground beef and breadcrumbs, baked with a tomato glaze brushed over the top, sliced thick, and served as part of a rotating daily blue plate special. This dish represented old-fashioned home cooking served to strangers, made by cooks who often used their own family recipe rather than anything written down or standardized. It disappeared from many menus not because anyone stopped liking it, but because the daily blue plate special format itself, a different home-style dish served each day of the week, faded as diners closed and remaining restaurants shifted toward fixed, printed menus instead. Number 4 is pecan pie. A rich, dense filling of corn syrup, brown sugar, and whole pecans baked into a flaky crust until the top turned deep amber and slightly crackling. This dessert carried real southern and southwestern roots along much of the western half of the highway, and it became one of the specific reasons travelers would seek out a particular diner by name rather than just stopping at the nearest one. Made-from-scratch versions required real pecans and real oven time, and as dessert cases across the industry shifted toward shipped-in, mass-produced pies, the specific richness of a diner's own recipe became much harder to find. Number 3 is apple pie, a lattice or full-top crust over cinnamon-spiced apples, served warm with a scoop of vanilla ice cream melting slowly into the crust. This dessert carried an almost symbolic weight, tied to an idea of Americana that the highway itself came to represent. It was baked fresh most mornings at diners that took real pride in their pastry case, and as in-house baking gave way to centralized, cost-efficient dessert programs at larger restaurant chains, the specific, slightly imperfect, genuinely homemade version quietly disappeared from most of the towns that once made it a daily ritual. Number 2 is the milkshake, thick enough to require a straw and a spoon both, hand-mixed in a metal cup on a spindle mixer, and served with the extra half cup left behind in the mixing tin for a second pour. This was the treat that defined an entire era of roadside stops, ordered by kids pressed against diner windows and by adults who wanted a taste of something that felt like a genuine indulgence in the middle of a long drive. Hand-mixed, made-to-order milkshakes took real time per cup, and as soft-serve machines and pre-mixed shake bases entered fast food kitchens, the specific thickness and texture of the diner original became increasingly rare outside the towns that never stopped making it the old way. And number one is the dish old-timers still argue about: chicken fried steak, a tenderized cut of beef breaded and fried like fried chicken, then smothered in a peppery white cream gravy and served with mashed potatoes doing the exact same thing beside it. This dish, more than any other, became the signature meal of the entire highway, ordered by truckers, families, and locals alike, in diner after diner across state after state. Every cook along the route had their own version, their own breading, their own gravy, and travelers genuinely planned stops around which town supposedly made it best. As diners closed and the ones that survived shifted toward pre-breaded, frozen cutlets to cut costs and kitchen labor, the wide variation that had once made this dish worth arguing about slowly flattened into a single, standardized version available at nearly any chain restaurant in the country, tasting the same no matter which exit you happened to take. What these 20 meals really represented was never just food. They were proof that an entire stretch of American highway had once been held together by small towns feeding each other and feeding strangers, one plate at a time, in diners that had no choice but to be good at everything because there was nowhere else nearby to go. They fed truckers running through the night, families stretching every dollar of a summer vacation, and locals who ate at the same counter their whole lives. Then a new interstate system quietly rerouted the traffic that had kept it all alive, and one by one, diner by diner, town by town, that entire world closed its doors. So here's the question worth sitting with. Somewhere out there, right now, some small business is depending on exactly the kind of foot traffic that could disappear overnight if the world around it changes just slightly. What would we actually lose if it happened again the way it happened here? If you ever ate at a diner on Route 66, or if your parents or grandparents told you stories about a stop they never forgot, tell us in the comments which one of these dishes you'd drive out of your way to find again. And if there's a diner meal from your own family's road trips that never made this list, share it below, because someone else watching this probably remembers the exact same taste. And if this brought back a piece of the open road, subscribe to Lostways America, because there are dozens more forgotten pieces of American highway history still waiting to be found.